Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Roy's Tie-Dye Sci-Fi Corner, episode number 182B. And with us tonight is our very special guest. He's a writer, he's a director, and he's a special effects artist, and he is Mr. Patrick Reed Johnson. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Yes, absolutely. And with me tonight, of course, is my co-host, my friend, the one and only, Mr. Ross Amico. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks, Roy.
Hey, Ray.
Again,
Patrick, great to have you back. And we were hoping that as I was saying, the
MYNOCks,
kind of
much on the power cables.
Yeah, it happens a little more often than I'd like out in the middle of nowhere where I live, but
no, totally understand that. And actually, where we're at here is like out in the boonies too. So a lot of times, what I usually have to worry about is falling trees in this area. That's where it kind of gets a little hairy. I mean, we actually had 2 trees hit the roof.
that happens a lot with us as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so we know how that is. Hey, before we get started, I just want to welcome our viewers that are out there. John Haig, the Haig is in the house. He's joining us from Pennsylvania. Welcome, John. And I see that Martin is joining us. He's joining us from New York State. Welcome, Martin. And friend from the theater, Mr. Bill Scarrato from Country Gate in Belvedere, New Jersey. Harmony, New Jersey is out there. Welcome, Bill. Good to see you out there. And Bill's actually watching us on YouTube tonight, too. So thanks for doing that, Bill. Ken Hutchins is also in the house. Welcome, Ken. And Sue is actually out there. She's joining us from Massachusetts. In fact, she was messaging me today, this morning and towards the afternoon, Patrick. And I was telling her I was actually typing to you as we were speaking, and she was very excited about it. So
That's
she's
great.
welcome out there. Dennis Chevalier is joining us from Canada. Welcome, Dennis. Good to see you out there as well. And Linda is also joining us from Canada. Welcome, Linda. Hope you're doing well. So it's great to see everybody out there, and I'm sure there'll be more folks that are going to be joining us. Before we get started with the show, I just wanted to, and get into everything, just wanted to give a tribute to a few folks. It's been a tough week in the entertainment industry, and we just wanted to kind of give a shout out to some of these folks just because of things that have happened. We lost actress and model Raquel Welch on actually 2 days ago. So she was an actress and a model. We featured the movie that we remembered her from best, which was Fantastic Voyage, the 1966 film that Ross and I had covered about 2 years ago. So sadly, she had passed at the age of 82. So we're remembering her. And then also we heard today, too, we got news about Stella Stevens, and we had just spoke about the Poseidon Adventure, and that was for New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, our episode just at the end of the year and the beginning of this year. So we're remembering her as well. And then also Edwin Thrower had gotten in contact with me and notified us about Gerald Fried passing, composer Gerald Fried, who had done hundreds of television scores, and also definitely a favorite me personally, especially from Star Trek, because some of the music that he did was some of the most beautiful music in a part of the series. So we remember him, and he was just a delight to have on the show. And that was just also about 2 years ago too. So we remember everybody. But with that, just want to get started. And I see a few more people have actually joined. Deborah is joining us from Phillipsburg, New Jersey. Welcome, Deborah. And Sherry, my wife Sherry's out there. She's actually saying hi to everyone. And Lou is joining us from Rhode Island. Welcome, Lou. And there we go. We are good to go. Patrick, talking about your movie, it was amazing. It was incredible. To be fair, I was not personally aware of it. A friend who is Captain Phil Merkel. He's a mutual friend, and I know he was on with Mary Beth and Mike for Sci-Fi Distilled. They're also mutual friends.
Yeah.
And Phil was discussing about your movie 52577. And folks, if you have not purchased this yet, or if you've not seen this film, definitely check it out. You can stream it online, but it is also available on Blu-ray. I would recommend to go the Blu-ray route because there's special commentary on there that Patrick contributes to. And the movie is a coming-of-age film, but it also ties into a lot of the stuff that we grew up with wanting to do, which was making Super 8 films. And the way you express it through this movie and talk about, how it's conveyed as far as growing up and doing the things that you do, I can't say enough about it. So it's pretty awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it was quite an adventure, both living it and then making it. No question.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, like growing up then in the 1960s, so obviously the first film, at least through the movie, that really inspired you was 2001: A Space Odyssey, as conveyed through that film.
Yeah, it was. I was nuts for the space program from the time I could remember seeing television. I mean, I'm told that I used to sit just gobsmacked watching Fireball XL5 when I was an infant, and all the Jerry Anderson stuff that followed. And whenever there was an Apollo launch, I was allowed to stay home from school and just sit in front of the television all day, whether it went off or not. And I was just deeply, interested in all that. My father was interested in the space program as well, and was a model maker. He built. I mean, that's not what he did for a living. He was a physician, right. but he loved building miniatures, and he was very, very good at it. And so I, of course, started begging for model kits, and he would give me tiny little, 5-piece things and some model glue, and I would, melt the damn thing from just putting too much on. It would be this mass of molten plastic and glue, and but eventually I got a little better at it. And but when 2001 came out, he was extremely interested. He was so interested in seeing it that he dragged my mother and I to what he thought was going to be the 7 p.m. show, but it was sold out by the time we got there, which was very weird because at the time, movies being sold out was a very rare thing. And so there was a twin theater complex, and there was another theater right next to it that was showing Von Ryan's Express. And so he said, "Come on, we're going to the 7 p.m. showing of that." And we're like, "We came all the way to Chicago to see Von Ryan's Express."
We get some.
He's like, "No, we came to see 2001, which starts at 10. So now we're going to sit through Von Ryan's Express. So we've got something to do until." So I'm 6, right? And I'm watching Von Ryan's Express, which I remember vaguely, but not. It certainly didn't rewrite my DNA the way 2001.
At least you got some Jerry Goldsmith.
Right. Well, that's true. But by the end, what I did know by the end of 2001 was that, and as they were carrying me out half asleep, I was not asleep. I was half asleep, which is better than most of the adults in the room. And I whispered to my mom in her ear, I said, "I'm going to direct movies." And she whispered, "First, you should probably graduate kindergarten, and then we'll see how that all works out." Right. And, okay. So I had to prove myself right, I guess.
What a movie! I mean, when you think about what you were being subjected to with all of that. Yeah, in fact, one of the comments is it about Omega Man. Ross's dad subjected him to Omega Man when he was 5 years old. So kind of a tie-in there.
Anthony Zerbe, man, you can't do better than Anthony Zerbe.
Oh yeah, come on, he was a Bond villain too.
Oh my God, he was amazing. His daughter actually teaches at School of the Arts where I taught for a while.
Oh really?
Yeah, and you look her up online, you go, "Wow, yeah, that looks like Anthony Zerbe's daughter."
Oh wow, it is a small world after all. So with that, it's interesting too. You mentioned about the space program. My birthday was July 20th, July. I was born July 20th, 1966, but July 20th, 1969 was the first moon landing. So, which was I always thought was really cool with that type of connection. But yeah, and I love the fact that you were into the Jerry Anderson shows right from the beginning too. So there's that connection, which is really, really cool.
Anything can happen in the next 25 minutes. Thunderbirds go.
So let me ask you then. So after after you saw 2001 and Space Odyssey, obviously you were blown away and everything by that. I mean, it was probably just like an awakening. And how long was it thereafter that you started really getting into the Super 8 films and everything, would you say?
It was, I remember distinctly that the initial instinct was very soon after seeing it, but I had to play my cards right, because I wasn't going to just ask to take my dad's coveted Super 8 movie camera and while he was at work and just, you know, run around with it. So instead I had to sort of figure out his routine. When does he get dressed? Where does he stand? When does he, and it ends up in a box in the closet. And I started working this caper out until I finally realized there was an opportunity. And I started just stealing his camera while he was at work. And I would have gotten away with it too, except this was the days of film, not video. If it was just video, especially solid state video, I could have just downloaded everything and been done with it. But instead, I was also slowly depleting his giant box, the bulk, you know, case of Super 8 film cartridges, until one day I realized I'd used them all. and so did he. But luckily, he at the time took it fairly well, because he thought it was just going to be a hobby. You know, later when he found out that it had taken over my existence and that I was not going to go to medical school, then things didn't turn out so well. But at first, he was like, "Oh yeah," and he was helping out. He'd be like, "Oh, you want to do an atomic explosion? Here's what you do. You know your fish tank in your room? Okay, get the fish out. You put them in a bowl. We'll put them back in later. Empty it out, wash it out, get it all clean. Put a photograph of Chicago upside down on the back window. Fill it with clean water, and put your camera on upside down on the tripod in front of it, and get some white shoe polish and dump it in, and watch what happens. And shoot it at 60 frames a second, because it'll slow it down, you know." So I did that, you know, and he taught me how to make my first atomic bomb shot, you know, for my Planet of the Apes film, you know, and
That's so cool.
You know, he was really into it while it was something that he could teach me.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it was just something that was fun and interesting and kept me out of trouble. But then of course, when it was time to go to college, and I was like, why? You know, because you're going to be a doctor. No, I don't know if you've noticed, since kindergarten, I've been making movies, Dad. That's what I'm going to do. And so that caused a bit of a schism for a number of years that was then rectified when his own son from his next marriage chose me for bring your Boy Scout troop to Dad's work day at the miniature effects shop I was running, instead of bringing it to his hospital where he was chief of anesthesia. And he had to come along, and we hadn't spoken in a couple of years. And then but he looked around and he saw what I was doing, and that it involved, you know, science and engineering and knowledge and astronomy and spaceships and you know, I got a call from my stepmother the next day saying, "You should have heard your dad in the operating theater the other day going, well, my son does special effects for movies now, blah, 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 blah." And so we patched it all up. It helped at the time that I was making more as a model maker in 1982-83. I started making more ultimately per hour than he was making as the chief of anesthesia at a major hospital. That's how popular model makers were in the early 80s, thanks to Star Wars. So,
it's pretty amazing. That's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Oh, Dennis Chevalier just said, "Roy, you just talked me into it. Literally just ordered it." So
thank you.
There you go.
I feel like we're having an auction.
Hey, and I see Mary Beth joined us as well. Hey, Mary Beth, thanks for joining us. Mary Beth is joining us from Massachusetts. Martin is saying, "Remember watching the first moon landing on a 5-inch TV, black and white, back in the day."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So let me ask you then. Oh, what was that?
I was 7 years old, standing in my uncle's living room outside of Fort Worth, Texas, and watching it live. Yeah, saw it live. It's amazing.
Now, what's amazing, I'm going to switch gears because you're talking about your dad, is your mom. Wow. Definitely tell us a story about your mom and everything. That's Shoot.
I mean,
Sounds
the
really
movie's the story about my mom. I mean,
Yeah.
she was an unbelievable powerhouse of a human being who was unstoppable. I mean, if anybody, I mean, my father was very quiet and removed and reserved, and was the kind of guy that if he needed a socket wrench, he'd go to Sears Roebuck with the whole family, and he would stomp around 3 floors of the Sears Roebuck, department store, trying to find socket wrenches, and he would not ask ever. That would. Mm-mm. Whereas my mom would be finally at the bottom of the stairs, calling up through the staircase, going, "Is there anyone here who knows where the socket wrenches are?" And at which point we would all go into little singularities and wink out of existence in embarrassment. She was a powerhouse. I mean, the best not included in the movie story I can tell is that, one time one of her Airedale Terrier puppies that had been sold to a couple in, I guess, Baltimore or something, or Connecticut, I can't remember. Anyway, I had taken it down in the family van in the crate with its dog food and its little blanket, and we put it in the Eastern Airlines cargo terminal, and they said, "Oh, cute little puppy, we'll take good care of him, don't worry." And they took him off to the plane, and about 9 hours later, I'm back down with another puppy that we're shipping somewhere else, and my mom calls the facility while I'm there and asks to speak with me, and she goes, "Listen to me, I want you to stay there until we're done with what I'm about to do." And I'm like, "What are we about to do?" Apparently, the couple that had bought this puppy that we had shipped hours earlier got to the airport, went to the cargo terminal for Eastern, and said, "Hey, we're here for our dog." And they're like, "What dog?" And they're like, "The dog that Janet Johnson shipped from Stover and Airedales." And they're like, "We didn't get a dog on this flight." Now, I know the dog got on the flight because I saw them load it, not just onto the trolley, but from where you were at O'Hare, you could actually see them put it, you see it go up the little conveyor belt into the cargo bay and get stowed and the whole thing, right? And they're like, no, they shipped it. And they're like, "Ma'am, do you see a dog in here? Here's all the stuff that came out of that cargo hold that wasn't luggage, and well, it wasn't luggage because it was a cargo plane. So this is it. This is what came out of that plane. There's no dog." So my mom's like, and she's like, "Patrick, you did see this dog get put aboard the plane?" I said, "I did." And so she just handed over to the guy. So she starts, right. And this guy's like going, he's like melting like someone out of, Indiana Jones, like, and meanwhile, so finally he's like, he goes, "Boss, get over here." And he hands the phone to this guy. So the supervisor's there like, "Ma'am, I'm telling you, there's no." "Okay, yeah, hang on. I'll call my shift supervisor or whatever in the other building." So he calls, and I'm standing there just trying to like edge my way to the door so I won't get beat up by these big brawny cargo dudes. And because I know my mom's going to get me killed. Right. And then finally, the last guy who comes in from like the downtown office in Chicago, right, on the line, and the other guys are going, and I don't know what's going on because I don't have the phone anymore. And that's the last I hear. They all hang up and they all look at me like, "Who the f- is your mom?" Right? Cut to, by the end of this, she had literally gotten astronaut Frank Borman, former Apollo astronaut Frank Borman, chairman of Eastern Airlines, woken up in his bed in Connecticut.
Oh my God.
At 2 a.m. She had gotten them to put her through. And he was like, "Ma'am, I'm going to find your dog." And so he got out of bed, started making phone calls, and "God damn it, I want this dog found, and I want it found now because I'm not going to sleep with that one eye open unless this woman's pleased," right? Cut to, they put like a search party out across the entire airport. What had happened was there had been a blizzard and they didn't taxi the plane all the way up to the cargo facility because they couldn't. So what they did was they sent the trolleys out down the runway in the dark to this plane. They unloaded it. When they were turning them around, they hadn't closed the chains or the doors over all the trolleys, and the crate had just gone flukunk out into the snow, and nobody noticed, right? So it'd been sitting out there for hours and hours and hours in the dead of winter. Luckily, when we packed up the dog, it had, you know, food and water and a couple of blankets, and they're really hardy dogs with big fur coats and, you know, the whole thing.
Right.
So they went out there. The dog was fine. The dog was just like, okay, now what? You know. And,
Right.
But I mean, that's who my mom was. She would. I mean, that was one of literally like hundreds of moments in her life that you were like, you can't do that.
But you did.
So in the movie, she really did get you the appointment to talk with Herb Lightman.
Oh yeah.
An American cinematographer.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that in fact the wilder the events in the film, the truer they are. The stuff that isn't exactly true is that I had to collapse like 3 years worth of events into one. Yeah. And Bill was really a senior and I was a freshman, but we were still friends. I was just the goofy little kid that followed him around. It became a whole order of magnitude easier to just have us be from the same class, things like that. But from the time I get to Hollywood to the time I come back, every single moment in that is exactly what happened. Except there was a lot more that happened. Like I ended up that day at Future General working on the mothership for several hours because all the model makers in the shop, when I left Steven's office, all the model makers, when this kid comes wandering in and it's like, "Ooh, this is great. Can I watch?" And they're like, "Watch? Dude, we've got 26,000 fiber optics to put into this mothership for Windows. Here's 700 of them and a heat gun. Get to work, kid." And so I sat there, you know, lensing fiber optics into the mothership for an afternoon with, you know, Ken Swenson and Greg Jean and Pete Gerard and all these amazing model makers. Yeah. And them, you know, saying, "So what do you want to do when you grow up?" "This." And they're like, "Let you."
So doesn't the ship actually turn up in the movie at a point? Don't you see the model of the ship? Did you actually work on that model then? It's in the movie?
I did. Yep.
Okay. Back in the day, though, you worked on it back in '77 or whatever.
That's right. And I'll tell you a couple other things. The little miniature like study model of the mothership, the little like black quickie thing that was thrown together by Greg Jean for Steven Spielberg to just consider a design that's sitting on Steven's desk in that scene, is the actual study model that Greg Jean built for Steven Spielberg to sit on his desk. It's not a replica. It's the real model that I had to literally pay a $10,000 insurance policy for, buy a seat for the box that was carrying it next to me on the plane home, and then meet Greg Jean, the famous model maker who we lost just, you know, a year and a half ago. Greg met me in the parking lot of the TGI Fridays in Marina Del Rey, and we did a surreptitious transfer. You know, it was like a drug deal in a dark parking lot. And then also the Close Encounter, or the Devil's Tower miniature that's in the film is the actual Devil's Tower miniature from the movie. And that piece of paper on the wall that Steven has written, you know, it's not the takes that take the time to take, or it's not the time it takes to take the takes that takes the time. It's his little soliloquy about how you waste time on a film set, signed by him. That's the actual document.
Wow.
Yeah, that whole sequence is great in the movie. And there's so much that we can ask you about that. I know we only have you for a limited time. So, but yeah. And if you watch the film with the commentary, you go into that a little bit, like where you found the Spielberg lookalike, which is, you know, fantastic that you found that kid.
Yeah.
Because he looked all the world like a young Spielberg.
Well, and it's funny. There were a couple of critics who weighed in saying the kid they got to play Steven is way too young. I mean, Steven was like 30 years old at that point. And I said, and I'm like, go look at photos of him on the set of Close Encounters. He doesn't look 30. He barely looks 13. You know.
Well, Austin Pendleton gets that great line then when they ask how old he is.
Yeah, 11. And well, Austin is just such a miracle, and he did it. I mean, the timing, the delivery. I mean, he's just fantastic. And you know, when I wrote that line, I thought it's funny, but if it's not read correctly, it's going to just lay there. But he sold it. Yeah.
And I found it very interesting that you said you wrote it with Bob Balaban in mind.
Well, not just in mind. Bob was attached. He was going to do it. what
Yeah.
happened, and what happened was we had Bob. He was really into it. He was so excited to do it. And then we just didn't have our financing in ducks in a row at the time that he all of a sudden had to go to Gosford Park. And suddenly he's not available. And, and he says, and meanwhile, I had worked with Christopher Lloyd on When Good Ghouls Go Bad. And Chris said, "Oh, okay, I'll do it. Sure. Okay." In fact, there's an old teaser trailer we did before we ever shot any of this movie, just to get financing, where Chris Lloyd shot a bunch of stuff playing the theater manager before playing Herb Lightman, because I wasn't at the time. I thought I was going to have Bob Balaban for that, and Carrie Fisher was my mom, and Joe Pantoliano played my dad in the trailer, and Ariana Richards played Robin, and Chris Owen played Bill, and there was and the kid who plays my brother Eric in the movie now played me, because he looked so much like me at that age that we were able to integrate into that teaser trailer photos and footage from my youth that you were just like, well, wow, it's the same guy. So yeah, it was but Bob, so finally what happened was Chris Lloyd was going to do it, and then Chris got busy on a film, so he couldn't do it. So I call up Bob, and Bob says, "Yes, I can do it." And then he calls like 2 weeks later, and he says, "No, I can't. I forgot we're doing this family vacation in Italy that we've been planning for like 5 years." And he's like, "I forgot it because we've been planning it for 5 years." And all of a sudden it's like, "Oh shit, it's right in the middle of your production schedule." So he goes, "I'm sick. I so want to do this. I want this." He goes, "Let me find someone for you." So he gets on the phone and calls Richard Dreyfuss in London, who's doing Shakespeare in London and can't break away. He calls, I mean, he gave me a whole list of people, and everybody he called loved the script and wanted to do it, but they were all committed to stuff. And finally, he's just like, "I just don't know what to do. I want this so badly. I want to do it. I'm going to ask my family if I can stay behind for a couple days, And of course, rightly, they said, "We'll kill you," So he couldn't do it. So then all of a sudden he goes, "Wait!" And if you can imagine Bob Balaban, going, "Wait," as opposed to "Wait." He goes, "Austin Pendleton's in Chicago, right down the road from you, doing a play at Steppenwolf. Let me call him and see." And so he calls Austin. Austin says, "Send the script." But the problem is, when you're working at Steppenwolf Theater, and you're not allowed to do a voiceover, a TV commercial, a guest appearance. You're not allowed to do anything but the play, right? Austin read it, and he said Bob Balaban said, Austin called back and said, "I have to speak these words. And I'm going to tell Steppenwolf I'm doing this, whether they like it or not. If they want to fire me, fine. I'm going to take 3 days off because we're only in rehearsals at this point. And I'm going to shoot this because he said, I have to speak the words." And I was like, because Austin's amazing. And so he showed up and just nailed it all. Just made everything. What I had in my head couldn't come close to what Austin gave us, and it was a miracle, and it worked out so well. His performance it was one of the first scenes that got cut together on the film, is his scene in that office, the introductory scene.
Yeah, he's great in the movie. It would have been so meta had you been able to get Bob Balaban, though, because he was just always, in all the films that you celebrate, he's in Close Encounters. Then he wound up being in the 2001 sequel.
Yeah.
He was, other than Jeff Goldblum, he was always the science guy, Altered States, it's like.
Yeah, no, and Bob would have also nailed it in a way that's, in many ways, Bob's much closer to the real Herb's actual persona, but that didn't really ultimately matter because nobody really knew other than me and a few other people. But just the fact that he went out on a limb and tried to get everybody involved that he did, and it was fantastic. But it was sort of like, in terms of the meta stuff. Having, before Colleen Camp got involved, Fred Roos suggested I go to Carrie Fisher, who I already knew personally. Not well, but we were part of this kind of secret Fight Club online chat room thing that I can't talk about or I'll be disenfranchised. But And so we knew each other sort of obliquely. And I thought, man, she'd be great. And of course it ties in and everything. But the more and she read it and she was like, I'm doing it. Of course I'm doing this. And she, of course, she was going to do it for Fred and for Gary Kurtz. But she also really liked the part. At a certain point, meanwhile, Gary Kurtz had been talking to Mark Hamill about doing a part that's from a sequence that's no longer in the movie, but it's a sequence where my character, who, as you know, is not someone who needs a lot of motivation, right? But he gets busted running down the street naked after jumping out his girlfriend's window in a sequence you've never seen, and it slams into a police car over the hood, and as he's being driven home, we see the officer just his mouth in the mirror. That's all we ever see. And I wrote it for Harrison Ford because Fred Roos said, "Oh yeah, we can, Harrison will do that. He'll do it for us. You just take the car to his garage and we'll shoot." He said, "Well, he'll do it." And I didn't believe it, and I got nervous, to be honest with you. But more importantly, what I didn't know is Gary Kurtz had called up Mark Hamill, who I didn't know at all, but Gary obviously knew very well. And Mark said, "Well, I'll do that part. It sounds good to me." And he goes, "Send it to me." So we sent it to him, and he read it, and he liked it. And he said, "Yeah, I'll do this for you guys." He goes, "But I want you to consider the following. He had read the whole script. He said, this is something really cool, and it's not a parody. Mm-hmm. It's not a parody. It's not like some other, films with Star Wars related content. And, and I speak about things like Fanboys, which I'm a fan of because I know, Ernie Klein, and Kyle Newman, and I like them both, but they both got, so beat up by the system. That movie was originally much more like our intent. It was not a parody. Right. And it got shoved into, even though there's a lot, it's a really fun film, but the original script wasn't really that. The original script was really one of the most moving things I'd read in a long time. And the final film is too, but it suffered at the hands of a lot of people trying to make it into something it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And Mark said, do you really want the possibility? What if 5% of your audience just rolls their eyes at, Luke Skywalker being the officer driving this guy home, lecturing him about, you kids these days, you ought to try making something of yourselves instead of getting high and drunk and having sex and running down the road naked. Maybe you should think about, trying to, make art or, be like that George Lucas guy who made a movie out of nothing. It's out right now. Instead of running down the street naked, you should be in a movie theater. And the kid, and my character's in the back just going,
and he's looking out for you for the credibility of the movie.
It's yeah. And Fred at a certain point felt even Carrie and I talked about a little bit about, you got to be careful because once I knew that Carrie was interested, I started writing things in like, she's in the kitchen making pancakes and the phone rings and she's got to talk to someone on the phone, but she's also putting Danishes on a plate for the kids to eat. And so she can't hear and she picks up a Danish and holds it, over, while it's in her hand to cover her ear and,
right.
So, and I started thinking, yeah, that's risky. And if it ruins it for 5% of the people, don't do it, Right. So we all agreed that we should keep the Star Wars actors out.
Yeah, no, I think in the long run it was the right choice. You remember the movie Hardware Wars? That
sure.
immediately comes to mind when you're saying like almost like a parody, and that's not what this movie is.
It would have been, but you could have gotten the guy who played Han Solo in that to be the theater. In fact, Mark Borchardt, if you know who Mark is from American Movie, have you ever seen American Movie?
I have not. No.
Oh, you two guys! Oh my God. Okay, that's your homework until next time. I'm telling you, you will never, ever forget that I recommended this. It's a documentary about a filmmaker named Mark Borchardt in East Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's you won't believe it's not performance art. It is one of the funniest and also very endearing documentaries about, independent filmmaking ever in the history of movies. I think it was nominated for Academy Award or it came close or whatever. Well, Mark, once you see it, you'll understand why when I met him at a screening at one of my local theaters back in Wadsworth and Gurnee and Lake County, I immediately went up to him afterwards. I said, "Can I take you to dinner and your partner here, because he has a partner in the movie? Wait till you see." Oh my God! And I took them to dinner, and I convinced Mark to play Todd, the theater manager. So it was going to be Todd. I mean, it was going to be Mark Borchardt, but Mark didn't want to join SAG because it cost like, I don't know, a couple $1,500 or something. He was like, "I don't have that kind of money. You want to pay for it?" We didn't have it in the budget. So I said, "You don't want, I mean, you can get into SAG. I'll sign the papers." And he had other things to do. I mean, he was getting pretty famous at that point. And I think he's doing really well, but you should see it. Yeah, I hope this helps. Yeah, you can rent it. You can get it online. You will never forget this movie. I promise you.
I'll definitely check that out.
Now you mentioned Gary Kurtz. You mentioned Fred Roos. Now, and you had, these guys were with George Lucas back to at least American Graffiti,
right?
So you had access to some of these actors and everything. And what you didn't mention, or which is implied, because you mentioned things like Gosford Park and what have you. We haven't brought up the fact, for anybody who doesn't know, that this film was like 18 years in the making. I mean, so you've been working on this for a while.
Yeah. So I mean, and the reason for that is that it's not. I mean, there are a lot of trolls and critics out there who are like, "Yeah, because it's no good and nobody wanted it." So no. What happened was we shot for $120,000. We shot everything that takes place in Illinois in the front and back of the movie. All those cars, all those sets, all those locations, all those actors, all that incredible crew. We had the people out of Chicago, the crew, and the producer Lee Jones. The real. I mean, Gary and Fred wouldn't mind me saying that Lee was the real producer. She was the one that really pulled it all together for us. All that was done for $120,000 in 30 days in 2004. And then just as we were about to spend the last $80,000 that we were supposed to get from the financier to shoot the Hollywood sequence, that financier just disappeared, literally just disappeared. Not even, and it was a nightmare. When we were basically done, we were shut down without a completed movie. So we cut it together, what we had, and along with a 30-minute slug line, Patrick Goes to Hollywood, and spent the next 2 years screening it all over the place, trying to get money to finish the movie. 2 years later, we found somebody, James McLean, and a group of investors that he was working with, saw the film and said, "What do you need to finish this?" And by then, what we needed was a lot more than $80,000, because the actors had to be brought back, the sets had to be rebuilt. There was a lot more cost. Plus, it was 2 years later, everything cost more. Plus, we had, in cutting the movie together, we had identified things we would really want to do beyond what we hadn't done. And so we said, we need $750,000. And that was also, and they said, yes, right in the room, and wrote the check.
Wow.
So off we went, and we shot the Hollywood sequences and some more additional materials, and did a bunch of post-production work. And meanwhile, the William Morris Agency and Cassian Elwes got involved, and they were all excited and wanted to send it to the Cannes Film Festival. We didn't get into Cannes, but we did get into the Hamptons Film Festival, which is a pretty prestigious festival. We went there and won some awards, and it was a wonderful thing, but we still didn't have all the money we needed to pay for the music, because you've heard the soundtrack. And it's just replete with, amazing songs from the 70s by the original artists, not sound-alikes, not, and it was about $2 million worth of music. Now, nobody was going to pay that ever, right? But luckily, because of Alan Parsons and David Russo, David Russo, who wrote the most amazing score I've ever had in any film. I mean, the score for this movie is outlandishly good for a movie of this size, and not even for a movie of any size. It's just beautifully done. And it's fully orchestrated, and David is, he's done several of my other films, but also, he does Gotham, and, he does all kinds of other stuff. He used to be sort of Graham Revell's second in command, and for his writing, sort of like James Horner, and how that works. But but between all of them and our contacts and Sean Fernald, our music supervisor, who is just doggedly pursuing everybody, and the fact that Michael Peterson, who I went to high school with, had grown up to become the chief legal affairs guy for Universal Music Group, that didn't hurt. We managed, and mostly because Ringo and Alan Parsons, obviously, who's an old friend, but he still wasn't going to put it in a movie he didn't like. But Ringo and Alan and the guys from 10cc and Roger Hodgson from Supertramp all watched the film and said, "Oh yeah, you can have this. Of course you can have this." And they all agreed to a favored nations deal that was like, a percentage point of what they would have normally charged. So instead of $2 million worth of music, we now had $200,000 worth of music, which was still way beyond our budget because we didn't have it, right? And so for literally another 8 years or so, we were, going on with our lives, hoping to find. We had distributors come up to us all the time and say, "Let's release this. There's a new Star Wars movie coming out, or let's release this. It's the 30th anniversary, or the 31st, or the whatever." And we kept, and I'd say, "Okay, yeah, all we need in advance." And oh no, we don't do advances. Not for independent films. There's no advance. You pay for the music and we'll distribute it. So suddenly we're stuck with a movie that people want, right? But nobody wants to actually put any money in advance and risk it against box office. So but meanwhile, Lucasfilm very generously. Now you got to understand, at this point, I not only know Gary Kurtz, but I actually, even before knowing Gary, I met George because of Fred, because Fred had seen, Steven Spielberg got Space Invaders picked up because he liked it so much. It had no distribution when we made it. Cost like $2 million. We made it. We were going to send it to film markets and stuff, but thanks to my old manager Melinda Jason, who set up the greatest scam sting in the history of film distribution, where she convinced 5 different studio heads that they were each missing out on the other one about to buy the film by sending a rep to a screening. They all sent reps, and at the end of that screening, we had like 3 offers to buy the film from 3 different studios. And I was signed to CAA by the end of that day, with the 5 most powerful agents in Hollywood signing me. And then one of the secretaries, one of these agents, ran in and goes, "We got a problem." "What's the problem?" "Nobody invited Amblin to the screening, and they want to know why," right? And so they're like, "Where's the film?" I said, "In your projection booth," because it was only in those days. I mean, it was just the work print. That's all we had. There were no tapes, there were no DVDs, there was no online downloading. We had the work print that we had just screened for these guys. And they're like, "Put it in a cab and get it to Amblin right now." And so they did. And that night, Steven and Max Spielberg watched it in the Amblin Theater. And the next day, I get a call saying, Steven called Jeffrey Katzenberg at Disney and told him he's got to buy this film and put it through the Touchstone process, and they're going to buy it and put it in 1,500 theaters. It was like we went from nobody knowing who the hell we were and having nothing to Steven Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg deciding that this movie's going into 1,500 theaters, right? So, and because of that, the next 2 days later, I get a call saying, my agent saying, "Fred Roos wants breakfast with you," and I'm like, "Well, okay." So the top of Beverly Glen, to where Fred shares offices with Warren Beatty, and there's this Italian restaurant he always hangs out in, and it's 10 a.m. and I go in and I'm ushered into the back area, where the Godfather would sit, right? And I sit down at this big table, and they bring in all this stuff prepping for a beautiful breakfast, and Fred's not there. Finally, he walks in, and Fred he's the most lovely and wonderful and good-humored human being, but does he love to fake not having a sense of humor. So he walks in just looking at me like the Godfather, just walks in and sits down. And then all the waiters come in, and they're putting his cappuccino and his cream and his sugar and all the different things, and he's putting sugar cubes in and cream, and he's just staring at me, and he's stirring his coffee, he's staring at me, and I'm like, "What the fuck's going on?" Finally he goes, he takes this and he puts it down, and he looks at me and he goes, "Your film, dollar for dollar, has more production value in it than any film I've ever seen in my career. And you're going to tell me how you did it." I'm like, okay. And so I babbled off how I did it. And he goes, all right, well, it was great meeting you. Maybe we'll work together someday. See ya. So off I go. I'm driving home and I get a call from my agent and he says, do you have time for a breakfast tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I got nothing but time right now. And he goes, okay, well, go over to the Bel Air Hotel tomorrow at 8 a.m. And sit down for 15 minutes with George Lucas. And it was like, you know? So I'm like, what? And he goes, so Fred Roos apparently right after this meeting called his buddy George and said, you know, you got to meet this kid, because George was looking for someone to direct Radioland Murders. And so I go over and walk in, and there's George at the table, and I sit down and we shake hands, and he's like, hey, Patrick, nice to meet you. I watched your movie last night. It's really good, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about this movie. And I had read the script that night. They'd sent it over. And on the way over to this meeting, I had said to myself, I had said, Patrick, the only way you get through this meeting alive and come out the other end of this is that you do the following. You never once mention the word star and the word wars within 3 or 4 sentences of each other, right? You can use those 2 words. You just can't use them in the same sentence.
Use them together. Yep.
Yeah. And I never did. And the 15-minute meeting turned into like almost 2 hours of just 2 dorks talking about film technology and developing new processes and things that could be done on a movie like this, and, you know, and how to, and script, obviously. And, you know, my notes, I think, and I had a lot of notes in those days. I was a guy with a lot of, you know, Emperor's New Clothes instincts. And I didn't like the script very much. And he could tell, and he didn't really like the script very much either. But I think he wanted somebody who liked it more than I liked it, right? And so, because it would have just been easier, you know, because, you know, I think in those days, George didn't much care what got done at Universal. He wanted out, you know, he just owed them a couple of pictures. And so, but he liked me enough that he called my agent and said, you know, I really like this kid. He never brought up Star Wars. So every time I would run into George at some, you know, premiere function or some event, you know, George would often be kind of standing off to one side, because George wasn't like a guy who would like to hold court or anything. He'd just kind of be there and hang out and say hi to people he knew. And I'd often walk up and go, hey, George. He'd go, oh, hey, Patrick. You know, and so we'd just stand there like 2 dorks talking about sci-fi stuff and technology. And so when it came time to, you know, pull this whole thing together, Gary, who I had met because we were both competing for the rights to the same sci-fi novel, and a guy that knew both of us, said, why don't you 2 guys just meet and buy it together and make the movie? You guys are perfect for each other. So he made that introduction happen, and the meeting went so well that the next day I asked Gary to move into my new offices at Universal, and I cleared an entire wing of those offices for him to have his company. And we became kind of like unofficial partners in developing all this material, right? And that would have been 1990, right? So years later, and in all that time, we developed several other projects together that are still at Universal. But in all that time, we would often go to lunch and just talk about, you know, other ideas. And one day I brought up the idea of this thing called Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which was going to be My American Graffiti. And it was just literally most of the stories that are in 52577 plus more, and the same kind of music, but nothing to do with going to Hollywood. Because I thought nobody's going to believe that. It's too, you know, who cares? It's not it's not that big, you know. And I told Gary the story without any of the Star Wars material. And he said, yeah, I know why you want to do this, and you probably should, but I've done mine. That's not one for me, because I don't want to do another American Graffiti. I did mine, and it's from a different era, and I don't relate to this music the way you, blah, 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 blah. So I said, well, there's one other little thing that I didn't mention. And I then mentioned what happened by me going to Hollywood and what my mom did and the whole thing. And he goes, well, that's the movie. He goes, why aren't we making, of course I'm going to make that. Let's do that. So I started writing it in 1999. And then finally got some financing in 2004. And the funny thing is, in terms of the rights, we had this issue where we had gotten into the Hamptons Film Festival, and I needed some paperwork or something from the festival to say that we had the rights to all the stuff we had included in the movie, including all this behind the scenes Star Wars material and the trailer and the soundtrack and the, you know, and so I called Gary, and Gary was usually pretty good at calling right back, and didn't hear from him. Like 2 days went by, and we only had like 3 more days before we had to submit this paperwork, or we weren't getting into the festival. And we'd been working for like 6 months to prep the film for this festival. And so I get a call, no. So I call again, and I think I probably asked Tiffany, his daughter, where's Gary? And she said, oh, he's in Siberia scouting locations for some, Russian fighter plane movie or whatever. And I was like, can we call him? And she's like, nobody knows how to get a hold of him. So I was like, oh, what are we going to do? So then I went, and I picked up the phone and I called my dear friend, John Knoll, up at ILM. And I said, who is at this point, working on getting ready for, I guess, prepping for the prequels. And I said, John, I need your help. And I explained, and he goes, okay, hang on a second. Because he had a DVD of the rough cut with him that I had sent to him. So he skedaddles from ILM over to the ranch and goes pounding up the stairways in the big house, blows past the secretary into George's office and says, hey, George, Patrick wants to know if you could maybe let him use some of this stuff here. And he played, just watch this real quick. And he plays like the significant moments as George sits at his desk looking at this, and he just goes, I think the answer is yes. And then the next day I get a letter from Lucasfilm, from their legal department, saying you now have the rights to all of this material for the end of all time throughout the galaxy, blah, 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 and it was amazing. I mean, because nobody could believe we got all this material, right? Because people just didn't get that from Lucasfilm. And then on top of that, Gary had, unbeknownst to me, shared the movie with Jan Harlan. And now Stanley had already passed away at this point, but Jan Harlan and I believe Christian Kubrick both watched it and said, yes, he can use footage from 2001 in the movie. At which point Warner Brothers said, yes, you can, for $12,000 per clip. And we had like 20 clips in there. I was like, okay, so I had to pick one, right? Which I did. But we're only the second film in history to be given permission, a narrative film. I mean, documentaries use this stuff all the time, or news shows, but we're only the second film ever in history to be allowed by the Kubricks to use material from 2001.
Well, that's a statement in itself, the fact that you were able to do that. And I think the fact that you got to meet George Lucas the way you did, and I can only imagine what was going through your mind. Going back, I'm just kind of rewinding a little bit, the anticipation. I mean, we're talking, to think about it and to stop and hit the brakes. Because, George Lucas, especially from everything where you came from and everything, and you knew how you had to approach it by, what you were saying, that you could not mention, you could not think and say Star Wars together. But it, putting aside that what you were trying to do in regards to the movie, that in itself just had to be something that was pretty epic. Just, in regards to that and being up to that and having that moment. So, and then the fact that you said you were having a really great conversation with him, and it was like for like 2 hours, and he probably was seeing a lot of you in himself, or, just seeing a younger version.
I think there's like a whole bunch of people from a certain time in film, and I don't in any way, shape, or form ever want to be thought of as comparing myself to George or Stephen in terms of talent or anything like that. But there is a similarity of experience in our childhoods. We're not in this exact same era, and we don't have the exact same motivations and things that inspired us. But although I think Matthew Anthony has decided I'm a narcissistic sociopath. Ooh, hi, Matthew. I'm not a narcissistic sociopath. I might be a little narcissistic, but I have great empathy for everyone. But anyway, Matthew, did you want to get a word in edgewise? It says here.
That's all right. He's deleted.
Where's a javelin missile when you need one? He's funny. Anyway, it's. I have not actually seen The Fabelmans yet, and
I was going to ask you about that.
And there's a reason. One, the main thing has been I wanted to see it in a theater first of all, and I've been traveling too much, and I've never really had any time while delivering all these foreign elements and these final video elements and everything else for the film. But a bunch of people who've seen it, there are a lot of trolls out there who think I somehow just like made my movie in the last 6 months after hearing about The Fabelmans or something. And but the funny thing is people who know Stephen really well and have worked with him a number of times and have worked obviously with me, and I know, people like Douglas Trumbull, who passed away obviously not too long ago as well, and Greg Jean, and others, but those that have seen the Fablemans that worked with him have said, obviously Stephen didn't copy you. And I'm like, no, of course he didn't. But they said, you need to see it because there are moments. So they've said there's like 5 moments in his film that are so like moments in your film that it's like entanglement. It's like there's something's going on because it doesn't make any sense because we didn't talk about our films. I think he saw mine years ago, but it was in a very different form and shape then. And I know people around him saw it, but it's not like Stephen needed to copy anything I was doing. He had his own, he's Stephen. The weird thing is that they still insist that something crazy is happening because there's like 5 moments that are too close to be coincidental. And so now I'm all excited because I got to see what these are.
Well, it would make sense that people who were enthusiastic about film and would go on to pursue this would have similar things happen in their autobiographies. And there are similarities, but I didn't think for a moment anybody was cribbing from anyone. I just thought it was a really interesting parallel because I had seen The Fablemans right before I saw your movie.
Right.
So, I think you'll enjoy it.
Patrick, I want to ask you too, real quick, and I didn't mean to cut you off. In regards to, because a couple of comments were coming in before while you were talking, and Mary Beth was asking, and also Sue was asking, and Phil, is there a plan to have a soundtrack come out for the film in the future, in the near future?
Okay. Yeah, it's already in process. I don't know. I don't know that it's going to be on vinyl or anything right away, but I know there's going to be a digital downloadable version of both the score itself by David Russo and then and a few of the songs. I don't think the entire soundtrack of songs is going to be available, only because you can get them everywhere. You know what I mean? You don't collecting them in one place. Maybe it doesn't. It's expensive to do that because the rights that we have for these songs are just for the film, not for the not for re-releasing. However, the song I Can't Get There From Here, which I wrote, was done in like 3 different versions. And there's a couple other songs that were written for the film that weren't used. And those are kind of interesting and fun. In fact, one of our cast members actually wrote one of them. Emmy Chen wrote a song called Moonwatcher, which is really beautiful. And so we may include those and some, temp versions and that kind of stuff. But I mean, really, for me, the soundtrack, the score that David Russo did is just so beautiful that's the collectible to me.
Go ahead, Ross. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to say quickly about, because we were talking about the Fablemans there, and then we can move on. The focus is different in that movie. There's more about his family and drama connected with that, with the filmmaking kind of being, part of the whole thing, whereas yours is more of a coming of age thing with the filmmaking. So they're different tones. Go ahead and ask your question, Roy. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Sue just commented, Roy, my husband John wanted me to tell Patrick that he couldn't get the final song out of his head for days. IMDb says that the title song, I Can't Get There From Here, is credited to Alan Parsons, but it also says the lyrics were written by Patrick. The lyrics are incredible.
Thank you. And Phil, I wanted to say I agree with you. There should be an 8-track release as well. But I think it was, you said Mary Beth, right? Was talking about her husband's the song. The song was actually written completely by me, but I shared credit with Alan and with Jared Mahone, the singer, just because it was the right thing to do. Because Alan, when he heard the demo that we'd done of it, said, I really want this on my new album. Can I have it? And I said, if you'll remix it and reproduce it for our film. And he said, done, and so we shared credit on it. But in fact, it surprised Alan. Alan didn't know that I wrote music at all. And what had happened was we had lost an ELO song called Waterfall, just because I think ELO had kind of consigned like their entire catalog to Marvel, for the Guardians of the Galaxy, and they just didn't want to dilute it. Whereas they had agreed earlier, and so they sort of pulled it. Suddenly I had this hole in those parts of the film where that song had existed. And I had originally written the song I Can't Get There From Here as a kind of, I don't know, a lament about Alan Parsons and Eric Wolfson breaking up the group because they just weren't this is kind of like the Banshees of Inisherin, you know, I just don't like it no more. You know, it's like they just weren't getting along, and they weren't seeing things the same way. And I knew both of them well. And so I was sort of like a child in a divorce wanting my parents to get together. And so I wrote this song about them. And then Eric died, and I felt like, well, okay, first of all, he's dead and can't participate in this weird, you know, thing that I'm trying to arbitrate here. And part two, it's not my business. It's not really my business. So I just put it away. But when I was suddenly looking for a song to fill this hole, I tried all these other 70s songs, and I couldn't figure anything out. And I finally just thought, wait a minute. I mean, I can't get there from here devoid of its connection to Alan and Eric, and that story I was trying to tell is really a love song at heart. Let me just turn it into a legitimate love song about two people that can't quite pull it together. And David Russo found Jared Mahone, the singer, and did a demo and composed, well, I composed the music, but David orchestrated it and got it done beautifully. And we recorded it and we sent it to Alan, and Alan liked it so much. He just said, I really want this on my new album. And he hadn't done an album in like a decade. And he goes, I want it in the last spot on the new album, which is the coveted, playing out the end of the story spot on the album. And it was really incredible for me being, when I was growing up, every car I got, every time I got a new, well, not a new car, usually a bad used car, but every single one that I bought, whoever got into it, or whoever heard that I bought a new car would say, did it come with the pre-installed Alan Parsons tape? So Alan knew I was a big fan. In fact, I'll be seeing Alan in a couple of days. I'm going up to visit him in Santa Barbara on my way to San Francisco after some meetings in LA about a special little project.
Yes, and I know we are running low on time here, so I just kind of want to just jump. I'm just going to jump a couple slides. I had other stuff I wanted to share, but we're going to go to that. So I'm just going to throw this up really quick. Can you give a backstory on this real quick?
I mean, it's not, first of all, no one was ever looking or waiting for the Patrick Reed Johnson story. That's not why this film was made. This film was made as a love letter to the people who saw more than I did that I should get the hell out of town and go. It's not everybody from my sister, my mother, my brothers, my Bill, Robin, who clearly knows more than I do that I'm leaving, and Linda and people like Herb Lightman and Steven Spielberg and Douglas Trumbull and everybody else, Greg Jean, all these people who are like, "What are you doing in your backyard, dude? Let's go," and and how who didn't have the fear that I was carrying around. They just had the judgment of what they thought maybe I was possibly capable of. And the monolith at the end is it's either a door or a wall. You don't know. Mm-hmm. You don't know what happens to this kid, right? Well, in 5/25/90, The Empire Strikes Back, you find out. It's a movie that takes place smack dab in the middle of the 20 years I spent in LA, and tells all the tales with all the names, with all the famous producers, directors, actors, studio heads, and and it ends much like Empire Strikes Back with the rebel or rebels in defeat, only to then move on to 5/25/04, Return of the Alumni, in which my Hollywood friends and my high school friends all get together in Wadsworth, Illinois, to make a movie called 5/25/77, and that journey. Now, again, we wouldn't take 18 years to make each of these. We would take 18 months to shoot them concurrently. And there will be, I don't know if we'll do them or not. We'll see. There's also talk of a TV series, weirdly enough, and it would involve all the original cast, all of these things. So, but what's this? Were any scenes in 5/25 that were inspired by Jitlev's Wizard of Speed and Time? Not consciously. I knew, I've met Mike back in the day, and I'm a huge fan of Wizard of Speed and Time, so probably it had some effect on me on a subconscious level, but I don't recall ever sort of saying, "Oh, I'm going to do an homage here," or I'm trying to do something like Mike did. But now, the more I think about it, the more I think, I can see why people are asking that question, because you're not the first to ask that.
And that was from Sue. Yeah. When did that movie come out, by the way?
God, 1979, maybe.
Okay.
80. I could have been. It might even been a little sooner, because it was. I believe it was out when I first arrived in LA. So
Okay.
Or had been out.
That's going to add to the homework for the first assignment you gave. So that's going to be the second assignment to look into that film.
Carbonite. Oh yeah. Well, I felt like I was in Carbonite for 18 years, but
oh geez, yeah.
Somebody finally turned that thing off. And then there's this project that has suddenly sold that I've had for years that I developed called Star Sailor, which is finally. I mean, it's been optioned since 1985. It's a 435-page screenplay that 3 different studios have optioned over the decades, and only now is it able to be made the way I think it should be made. It's probably a 10-episode limited series, and you guys are the first to hear about it. So
well, we appreciate that.
and the really coolest part about it is that it's who's going to star. Because one of the people I'm meeting with when I get out there is.
There you go. There you go.
Pretty awesome.
The squirrel did it to us again.
And I have to do the music from Best of Both Worlds. Dun 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 dun.
You're gonna get us pulled from YouTube, Roy.
What's that?
You're gonna get us pulled from YouTube.
We're gonna have to wait for Patrick to come back. It's the cliffhanger, folks. The first time we've done a cliffhanger on this show. But there you go. Thank you, Patrick Reed Johnson. Very, very cool. But yeah, we will hold on to your hats, folks, and we will be reconnecting with him again, and then we'll find out who's going to be starring in this film.
Yeah.
Ross, real quick, as far as stuff that you got going on this weekend.
Oh, geez, you're slamming me here. What am I doing? Okay, Picture Perfect. These are the 2 shows I've got on WWFM, the Classical Network. Picture Perfect's the movie music show that airs Saturday night at 6. This week it's powered by steampunk. They're all films with kind of steampunk elements. So I've got music from Hugo by Howard Shore. What else is on the program? Wild Wild West, not the great television series, but the movie with music by Elmer Bernstein. What else is on there? Powered by Steampunk. Powered by Steam. You hit me unawares, Roy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Pat, go ahead.
What's that?
No, go ahead.
No. I just my head wasn't in the place here. I'll look it up as I'm speaking here. Also, of course. Golden Compass by Alexandra Desplat, but Time After Time, Miklos Rozsa, with H.G. Wells pursuing Jack the Ripper across time through a machine with a machine of his own invention, from Time Machine. So all that stuff is powered by steampunk on Picture Perfect tomorrow night at 6. The Lost Chord is Saturday night at 10. That's unusual and neglected classical music. And I'm focusing on a composer named Adolphus Hailstork. And I've got a great big cantata he did called Done Made My Vow on a text by Martin Luther King and others. It's a great choral work, and that's the principal piece on the program, but I've got some shorter things by him on there as well. The program is called All Hail Hailstork. Music of Adolphus Hailstork on the Lost Chord Sunday night at 10. If you can't listen at the times indicated, they will be posted. The shows will be posted as webcasts at wwfm.org. And I'll be writing more about them on my Facebook page this weekend at Classic Ross Amico. Thanks, Roy.
Thanks, Ross. And just to let everybody know, next week we'll be back with the show. It'll be next Friday. And it's going to be a special episode, and it's going to be Leonard Nimoy Special Memories. And this is going to be presented by a longtime friend of Leonard Nimoy. She will be joining me on Friday night, and that is Bonnie Moss. And she was a very close friend of Leonard Nimoy's, and she's going to be talking about some of the stories of her friendship with him and just some stuff that we may not have heard about before. So just stay tuned. That'll be 7:30 on February 24th. And then Ross and I will be back on the 26th, and we will actually be doing the 1986 film Aliens. And this is the second in the series. So we're going to try to get back to some sci-fi. And that will be at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we're going to cut it short tonight, folks. I want to thank everyone for joining us and wishing everyone a wonderful weekend. And before I do that, stop sharing. And it was a pleasure having Patrick Reed Johnson on. And again, cliffhanger, folks. So we will find out next time in the near future who will be starring in his upcoming film. Until next time, live long and prosper and have a nice weekend. And we will see you. Bye-bye.